Welcome, everybody. It's time once again for the next chapter with Charlie Hedges, as he explores turning the page on his life and yours.
Welcome, friends, to the next chapter with Charlie. It's so nice to be with you once again. Our special guest today is Ben Keesey. Ben is a social activist committed to serving people in communities of the disenfranchised, the poor, and the socially neglected populations, beginning in Africa and now right here at home. Ben currently is an executive dedicated to the mission of the CAC, the Center of Action and Contemplation with Richard Rohr. The mission reads this in brief. The CAC is an educational nonprofit introducing seekers to the contemplative Christian path of transformation. And they do such a fine job, and Ben does such a fine job. So join me as we dive deeply into Ben's newfound contemplative path. Ben Keesey, welcome to the next chapter with Charlie.
Thanks so much, Charlie. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you as always. You know, bro, you were a guest on the show a couple of months ago, and we talked about your life as CEO of an awesome nonprofit, Invisible Children. Now, Invisible Children, if I get this right, is a group designed to save children in Uganda from the terrors of a warlord intent on taking youth as prisoners who will be trained to serve in terrorist army. And some of the girls are taken into sex trade. It's all for money. So tell me, how long were you CEO of Invisible Children?
I got involved in 2005. And 2005, the UN was calling that situation that you described the most neglected and forgotten humanitarian emergency in the world. Because this rebel group, led by the leader that you named, Joseph Kony, was forcefully and violently abducting children en masse at the scale of hundreds, if not thousands per year, which led to this massive community destabilization event where the children would leave their homes out of fear of abduction, sleep together in downtown city centers, and then other groups were forced into internally displaced camps, up to 1.8 million people. So it was this very hidden. I mean, the term invisible children was pulled from a UN report because even their best statistics, they say they don't know exactly how many children were abducted by this rebel group. So it was both niche, hidden, but then also huge in scale. So yeah, we started in 2005. I was a 23-year-old CEO. And then the organization changed substantially in the 20 years following. So I was there for 10 years, 2005 to 2015. And then it's continued to this day. It's changed substantially because the violence of the rebel group has gone down significantly, thanks to many of the interventions of Invisible Children and partners. And now they're doing more peace building, community support, and long-term development work in Congo and Central African Republic. My light just fell, but I caught it.
Did you?
Got it back.
Good catch.
Yeah.
Now,
so 2005 to 2015.
Okay, as I understand it, during your regime, during your time there, it seems to me from the videos that I watched, you pretty much disabled Joseph Kony, where he was no longer the power that he once was, and he became sort of an also-ran terrorist in the jungles of Uganda and Sudan.
Yeah, we were one part of a many multi-pronged effort of powerful local leaders leading peace talks throughout the decade, from international partners like the Bridgeway Foundation to then the African Union support, the United Nations, the U.S. military, Green Berets that were deployed. So yeah, Invisible Children played a key role in funding and driving a lot of the advocacy, the awareness, the attention. And then we did some very cool, innovative, cool is maybe too casual of a word, but some very compelling work on nonviolent ways to help captive women, children, and even captive armed fighters defect and return home. So tackling the question of how do you reduce violence? How do you help the guns, fall silent? How do you help people lay down their arms that in some ways are also lethal killers, right? So do you mind, let me paint the picture, Charlie. It's like one of these horrific stories is, a boy gets abducted at 15, violently ripped from his home, conscripted into the rebel group, is now a trained fighter, is part of raids on other children through the subsequent years, rises in the rebel ranks. So now he's 22 years old. He's got 7 years of experience. Is that now 22-year-old? Is that a victim? Is that a killer? It's both. And so we tried to take the approach that the situation, it was like a hostage situation,
right,
that needed to be de-escalated, disarmed through as much nonviolent means as necessary. Which sadly is not the modus operandi of most of our law enforcement or military interventions, right? Like most of the military is not trained on nonviolent defection strategies. And so that's what we were doing as a nonprofit charity, is we were playing our role, setting up early warning radio networks, setting up defection messaging, cool stuff I could talk about, like playing messages from helicopter speakers while then partnering with the militaries to set up safe defection points and whatnot. We were a very non-traditional charity. And I should say, forgive me, I should say right up front, I am now a volunteer supporter of Invisible Children. I'm a monthly donor, but I don't have any formal tie with the organization. So I'm here as an individual. I'm here as Ben Keesey, the human, not as an official spokesperson for Invisible Children, nor even as an official spokesperson for the Center for Action and Contemplation that I'm currently working with. Obviously, I'd love to talk about it in the context of my life, but really, I'm here in my personal capacity.
Yeah. As we, on the last podcast, which was a couple of months ago, and if people want to look up the podcast, there are a couple of videos that you guys produced that are just amazing. Now, you had you didn't have thousands, you had millions of people supporting Invisible Children and the removal of Joseph Kony. And you tell us about, and you led a multi-million-dollar effort, and tell us about the response to the 2012 video. I think that was that's just such a story. We told it the first time, but I'd like to tell it again.
Yeah, and you're right. You're correct that if you right now go on YouTube and you want to Google Invisible Children or the film Kony 2012, you'll see it there on YouTube, and you'll see it's roughly 100 million people have watched that. And what made that number even bigger is that this was 13 years ago. This is before long form films on YouTube were a thing. Companies were producing content on YouTube. It was a very different place. So when we released a 29-minute, 59-second documentary on YouTube, our big dream was that 500,000 people may watch it. That was our big, ambitious, like, holy smokes, that would get a lot of attention.
Right.
Believing then from that attention, we could help sustain the bipartisan effort in Congress that was going on at the time to support the intervention to end the war. And so from the goal of 500,000 being this big, ambitious goal, it went to 100 million in 6 days. And everything that came with that. A huge surge in support, a huge surge in...
Went to 100 million in 6 days.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Fastest to 100 million in history at the time. Yeah. Yeah.
And, so as I'm thinking about your personal life now, and Invisible Children, you led this multi-million-dollar effort to erase the power and influence of Joseph Kony, and you were, to many degrees, successful in that mission. I mean, it's an amazing, amazing story. Yet, as a successful social activist, you still found your life was still missing something essential, and that was some sense of spirituality. But you know, when people want to say, I want to do something spiritual, or, you know, become more spiritual or become more indoctrinated, you know, the first effort is go to church. But that wasn't your first effort, was it? You sought out a different path of divine contemplation. Tell me, how in the world did you end up there? That is, you know, that took me 30 years of Christianity to get to contemplation.
Yeah, well, I'd love to hear more of your story. I'd love for you to share that too. But I'm happy to go first. I mean, I did do a lot of going to church as a young person, especially. And
oh, that was part of your life as a kid?
Yeah, as a young person, especially. And through my high school, college days, very, very consistently. The challenge that I had, like really what sent me on a slightly different path was the experience of, you know, spending time for 10 years in the Invisible Children days with communities that were facing such suffering. So, and I know you've traveled to Africa and specifically Uganda before. There's such a contrast in communities facing, especially where we were, facing active armed violence, where there still is this beautiful sense of joy and vitality and community and like the miracle of a day. But then there's just unbelievable tragedy all around you. And when you spend enough time there, it becomes personal. You know, it'll never be the same as like when it's your own community, but 10 years is not nothing. And so in the face of, you know, violence against kids, violence against families, the senselessness of it, you know, it was very hard for me to step back into, this might not be the right way to say it, but like kind of normal church or normal religion, because the question of suffering was so paramount for me. And so I needed a bigger conception of God than maybe the more simplistic kind of Zeus God that I had in my mind earlier, like that would dole out blessings for the faithful. Well, what happens when the faithful as children are getting violently attacked over and over again? So my theology was getting pushed and pressured, and my desire for you know, is it not the age-old question of how do you make sense of a loving God in the face of evil suffering? And that, thankfully, I'll never forget the day I was in Vancouver, Canada. I was walking on the boardwalk there. Have you been to Vancouver? Do you know what I'm talking about? That beautiful inlet. You know, there's like planes flying and landing in the water.
Vancouver's very cool.
Yeah. So I'm walking on that beautiful, like surrounded by those hills and nature, and my executive coach that I was working with at the time was probing around just some inner life questions for me of. Because I was really wrestling at the time. Invisible Children was struggling. We were not hitting our budgets. We were having to let go of our team, cut back on our programs. It was very challenging. As a young leader, I was really wrestling because my identity, it was feeling like failure. My identity was getting caught up in like the organization is shrinking. We're facing this external criticism for our work for reasons we could explain. And so as a young leader, it felt like I'm failing. I am then a failure. Who am I? You know, if I'm a failure at 30, then my whole life is a failure. It felt catastrophically scary. And so my executive coach was probing around a little bit, and thankfully, like a good mentor and coach can. And he asked about my spiritual life, and I just started opening up of like, I'm struggling. I don't feel like I have a healthy spiritual practice or a conception of God. And so he's actually the one that introduced me to the writer Richard Rohr. He's like, have you heard of an author named Richard Rohr? I think you might connect. And Richard writes extensively from and about the Christian contemplative tradition and contemplation as a path that can hold the whole. So contemplation, it sees things in wholes, or you try to build the ability to see reality not as you wish it is, but as it really is. Through loving eyes, through like the eyes, you know, ultimately through the eyes of God. And so it was just a very different approach. And from that place some of the sharp questions around suffering started to soften, and I began, I mean, gosh, it sounds cheesy as I'm about to say it. I just began to fall into a deeper trust that life is just so much more than anything I can control, and that I want to and believe that we can trust somehow that there's something holding this all together. And that's a big step of faith, you know, that some way, somehow, something is holding this all together. And that's been, in many ways now for 10 years, essentially my own personal path. And then my work with Center for Action and Contemplation is deepening in one step at a time,
right,
into the contemplative life.
So it was sort of a, you know, these words sound trite, but it feels like, you know, it began with an identity crisis, with who am I, what value am I, and your path to spirituality probably led you to the conclusion, the way I'm viewing the issue doesn't really matter. That's not, you know, my value to a society, to culture is important, but my value begins with a relationship, and then it extends to a culture. But if you only have the culture, then, you know, then you begin using a set of metrics that don't really serve you as a person, don't really serve your heart.
I think the question of who am I think that's one of the most important questions there is. How do I define myself? How do I make sense of this? And if who am I is only what do I do? You know, what does my business card say? What have I accomplished? What do other people think about me? Those are vulnerable identities. So those things can change, or people's view of you can really shift. My work ebbs and flows, you know, and so in that chapter, when it felt like my work was failing, then I'm a failure, then I'm going down with the ship, you know, because my identity was pretty shallow. It's pretty shallow. And yeah. So I think about another mentor of mine. I'm kind of in my final months leading Invisible Children. And again, it was just so exhausting. Picture traveling to and from Africa a lot. Picture just full, intense work days, because our U.S. operations would start, you know, in Pacific time zone. We'd work a full day. Then our Africa team would wake up and start going, because we were about 11 hours apart.
Right.
And our teams in Africa were bigger than our teams in the U.S. So it felt like working around the clock, and often it sort of was. Our teams in harm's way were responding to active conflict, right? It's a very challenging operating environment. People's lives are actually on the line that are working in the conflict zone. So for me to like get kind of balance in that was very difficult. But then a mentor, as I was exiting, he was mostly like, Ben, you need to just decompress. Like, A, chill. Right. B, start asking the question, what was it in you that wanted to help support or help those children in Africa? And I was like, that is such a weird question. At first, I was like, what do you mean? What was it in me that wanted to help the kids in Africa? Isn't that obvious? He's like, sit with it. And so that's the path. It's like pulling the layers of the onion of, well, why do I want to, quote, help? Like, what is my motivation? And then you can see there's some motivation to help that's deeply sincere. There's some belief that I need to, so that, because it's good behavior in the eyes of a potentially punitive God. There's some part of that that's because I want to be seen as success. And then that shows up and it's like, oh boy, that's a scary one. I want to be admired as effective. I'm an Enneagram 3, so forgive me if you don't know the Enneagram. It's a personality typing tool, but it says Enneagram 3s, one of our primary strategies to avoid feeling worthless, that's my own language, is to be seen as successful by what we accomplish. Right? So this is very, very common, especially in our culture.
Right.
But all that to say, Charlie, it's
American.
Like,
that
totally.
Is very
American. Very American. So it was pulling apart the threads of like, why am I trying to interrogating my own motivations, interrogating my own intentions, learning about myself, and trying to be okay with whatever I find, which is a bit scary, but that was a lot of the journey.
What did you learn about your motivations? What were your motivations at that time? That you said, you know, what makes you the server, the giver? You know, what drives that aspect of you?
Thank you for asking. Thank you for caring, because it's fun knowing you in context. This is how this conversation would go for sitting on a bench, in San Diego talking. So thank you for being a caring, thoughtful, curious person, Charlie. I really appreciate it. I found a lot, and I'm still finding it. But I think the shallow answer was because I want to help, and that was real. There was genuine, like when you come face to face with like immense human suffering. And I think I was wired at an early age. I think it was somebody says the best part of my evangelical Christian training, that your life is more about you. And there was some connection to the least of these brothers and sisters. You know, what you do for the least of these, you do for me.
Right.
So when I see when I see suffering kids, it's like my heart breaks. I want to get in there and help. That's one level, and that's definitely real. There's another level, I think, that's an unconscious desire to fix and control. Like it's fun to be the good guy, right? Forgive the gendered language, but like it's nice. It's the ego. It's nice to be seen as helpful and effective. You know, so that's the Enneagram, the achievement orientation. It's like especially once I'm working on this problem, I want to be good at it. So there's that. Then ultimately there was the fear of failure. They're like, well, what if we don't succeed? And by succeed, meaning dismantling the LRA, helping 1 million people return home. It's a massive project. Running now a $20 million a year business, supporting a good work environment for all of our team, caring for the emotional, physical, spiritual health of it's like, I think then once I got below, it's like, oh, that actually, the fear of failure, the fear of being seen as a failure, as a young leader, that was doing a lot of the motivation, the heavy lifting.
Right.
So it's not that it cancels the like sincere, but it's very honest to see that's operating too. And the fear of failure then, I think, was the source of a lot of the anxiety and stress. Like, I think when I look at my leadership, like what was causing my own personal stress and anxiety, it was more that level, the fear of my ego identity, my fear of failure.
Right.
That was causing undue stress. Because the other one, like just the fact that we're responding to something in which people's lives are on the line, like there's enough stress there. That, like, I wish I could be operating more at that level and not wrapping up. And on top of that, what does it say about me? You know, that's the part that I wish, and that I have, and I'm doing a lot of work to try to separate. And I hope that if there's other leaders listening, you know, there's a version of this that you could relate to, of the actual business strategy, leading a team, setting a culture, setting values. These are all very challenging topics. They're very fun, but they're very challenging. And if the more that you can remove then some of the unhelpful extra anxiety of fear of what if it goes wrong, what does that say about me, the more you'll be able to show up with positive energy towards the things that will actually accomplish your goals. So yeah, interrogating fear is almost always an effective method to tease out your motivations. Like, where is it really coming from?
Well, you know, that's a difference between the contemplative approach and the typical American approach. Or not the typical American, but our typical ego approach. That's a better way to put it. Our ego approach. We view fear as the enemy. And therefore, control becomes, our powerful resource for sort of sort of understanding and dealing with this fear. And the contemplative approach, it seems to me, now tell me if this is for you, but it seems to me, rather than looking at it as an enemy and looking at it as from the outside, is to look at it from the inside and embrace your fear. Embrace that fear and say, what is that telling me about me? And this is not about other people. This is not so much external. This is all internal. And so my control is just sort of masking my fear for the moment. It's masking my fear for the moment. And that just doesn't work. We have to deal with, I really, I don't want to say I like fear, but what fear does for me is very powerful. It's very powerful because it.
Yeah, say more. That's interesting.
Well, it's a mechanism that tells me important information of misguidance. That I'm going by a star that is not my North Star. It is my distraction star. And I keep going after these things that are going to mitigate fear rather than saying, if I'm afraid, what causes me to be afraid? Not the situation, but what's going on in me internally. What has happened to me and from childhood. And, I'm going to say I'm fortunate that I had a very troubled childhood. One of rejection and abandonment we've talked about. I say I'm fortunate because I can go back and I can look at things that occurred to me in my early life and see how they impacted all my fears. I'm horribly fearful of rejection, even today. But I know that's part of life. I know that's part of not everybody's going to like what I say and what I do. And that's okay. But that requires me to find something to tether myself to that is truth. That is I know that fear is not truth. Truly, at the end, it's fabricated. Fear is a fabricated sort of attitude that once I understand what generates that fear, I begin to understand, not control it, but work with it, not even cope with it. See, how many years I coped with it, Ben? I coped with it. I learned to manage my fear of rejection and abandonment. I became an expert at managing that. That was, I knew how to deal with it, how to cope with it, but I didn't know until really, and I successfully did that. I felt like I had a nice interior understanding of myself until I just, within the last few months, honestly, it took till 75 years old to figure out that is not something I deal with. That is who I am. That is my core. I am rejection and abandonment. And once I understand that's the core of who I am, that's what brings me to a place like CAC where I can do action and I can serve those that are rejected and abandoned. And when I find somebody that's rejected or an outcast, they're one of the first people I want to make friends with. I want to say, I get it. I get you, and know that I love you for what you are and who you are. So that's kind of what I mean about embracing fear.
That you have a real now soft spot or tender spot in the said in the best way towards people who are in that place, because you've been there, you know what that's like. So your heart, it's like the love flows more easily, the connection flows more easily to people who are rejected or abandoned. Is that what you're saying?
But I've always had that. See, I've always had that. I didn't know why, because I identified with them. But I just didn't know the reasons behind it. But I've always identified with the rejected and abandoned.
That's neat. That's neat. And I also appreciate, Charlie, that you said some version of something you're awakening to that right now. I find in a lot of podcast conversations or just like public conversations, most people are quite comfortable talking about vulnerability that was in the past. And it's harder to talk about what you're dealing with right now or recently. And so I appreciate you bringing that into the mix. The other thing that came up, so when we said fear, it's like, I heard it said once, like, if what's showing up as fear is coming through your senses, you smell something, you feel, you're punched, and we're talking about something different than than more like psychological fear when it's coming through your thinking. And that type, I just don't want to dismiss like people that lives are gnarly enough that you're experiencing fear that's real, and I've been in those situations. But when I say like interrogate my own fear, does that make sense? It's like if you smell the helicopter's going down and you're feeling fear, that's different than when you're sitting alone at night. When I'm sitting alone at night, stressed, unconsciously aware that I'm fearful of being seen as a less than successful 27-year-old CEO, that is the fear that I like to interrogate and that I'm much better at now through learning contemplative practice. So
that's almost oxymoron, to be a successful 27-year-old CEO. I mean, those words, I hear you say that and say 27-year-old. What I was doing at 27 was much different. I was a full-blown, radical, crazy hippie when I was 27. I was nowhere doing what you were doing.
Yeah, whereas I was wearing suits and ties and going to Washington and going to Africa and lying about my age that I was older than I really was. And
I was wearing tie-dyed T-shirts and bell bottoms.
Yeah. Yeah. But what was I going to say? But the other piece I'd put in the mix is Richard Rohr, he has said at times that one of the ego's primary moves is to find ways to feel separate and superior. And so that's been very helpful for me. Is he says that's a good one, separate and superior. And that in some ways that's like the role of your ego, which isn't all bad. Drive, motivation, put your skills and your strength into the world. The other one-liner he has is that the ego's primary move is to blame or to fix. So those four things, separate, superior, blame, fix, those are now like very like warning signs that when I'm interrogating my life through contemplative practice, which is often like sitting in silence, going on an intentional walk, breathing, slowing down the racing mind, just the reactionary experience, trying to tune in with what's really going on. If I touch in on those things, separate, superior, blame, fix, then I'm like, okay, slow down. And again, it's not reject, push that away, then boom, deny, but it's notice, okay, I think what's coming online there is less than my highest self. That's my younger self. That's my scared self. That's the lower, the simple Ben Keesey self that wants to be better than you. I'm like that. Okay, that's there, but is that the deepest version of who I am? Sorry, I just pulled lint right out of my pocket. That was so funny. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I pushed my. But I just really have appreciated the simplicity of, if you notice the impulse to being separate or superior, or the impulse to immediately blame, immediately fix, then slow down, interrogate, interrogate in a kind way, like sit in contemplation about what's really going on there.
I think our listeners can really identify with this separate and superior, blame and fix. That's a go-to. But you know what those four, would they be verbs, nouns, whatever, what those four words, you know what else they define? And I'm really sad to say this, but you know what they define? The contemporary church.
Mm.
That is to be separate and superior. And it's guised in the terms of holiness. To be holy, I remember in my seminary, I went to the seminary with the conservative name, Western Conservative Baptist, you don't have to say Conservative Baptist. But I went there and I loved it. It was a magnificent education. It was, oh my goodness, I wasn't in the Christian community until I was 30 years old, so I came without baggage, and there were lots of things I was learning that was really good. But we studied from the Hebrew kadosh. We studied holiness, and holiness, if you take it literally, a word, a literal word connotation, it means to be separate. It means to separate yourself from the world and separate yourself from the mundane, and move yourself only to the divine. And I just take an opposite viewpoint now. I take an opposite viewpoint. Holiness to me, a friend of mine, Terry Hershey, and I, we talk frequently about the ordinary is the hiding place of the holy. And the holy is found in integration, and it is accepting of the normal, of the everyday, and say, how can I serve that? And how can I be a servant, not a superior micromanager? that how can I serve that? Let me tell a story that kind of explains that. Terry Hershey, who's on the show quite a bit, he's a very, very dear friend. He talks about when Moses came upon the burning bush, and Moses was, struck obviously by the burning bush. And then the voice of God says, Moses, remove your sandals because you are in a holy place. And so we have typically interpreted that to mean your sandals are dirty, don't bring the dirt. You want to bring cleanliness before the holy. And Terry takes a whole different view of it that I don't know that if I were to do a Hebrew word study, I'd come out and get this, but I just love this approach. He says, God tells Moses, take off your shoes, bury your feet in the dirt, bury your feet in the sand. It was in the desert. Bury your feet in the sand. Feel the warmth of the earth. Feel the warmth of the ordinary, of the beauty that we have. And, I think that is, an approach to holiness that is so healthy. It is not about blaming, and it is not about superiority, and it's not about being better than anybody else, but it's accepting and being one with everybody else in their humanity and working together to work that out.
It's a neat reframe. You're in a holy place. Get your feet in the sand.
In the sand.
Get your feet in the sand. Take off your shoes.
Feel the holiness.
Yeah. Get on your knees and get close to that holy place. It's from my experience, it's all so subtle. Like spiritual language it's tricky because it can be very misinterpreted. Like we all have different interpretations. We all have different meanings for words and things. So I'm sensitive sometimes because I feel like I don't have the right words to share because people might hear it differently. But yeah, I'll just let that go.
Yeah,
but,
give me a shot at it. Give me some of your crazy words. I'm interested.
No, I just mean in general when I have that's an aside. But what I was going to say is, if we take seriously that we as human beings are intimately just a part of life on this planet, that this planet that has an amazing diversity of life, we're part of that, then it's easier for me. So this is where I go when I'm feeling my ego is firing off and I want to be separate and superior Ben Keesey and show that I'm better, more, smarter, more accomplished or wiser than someone. I feel those impulses, but then I try to settle and I'm like, okay, the tree outside my window, it would be so funny. Like it'd be comically funny if you got to listen into that tree's inner thoughts and it was like really competing against the other trees in the neighborhood. It was like, its inner thought was like, dude, my branches on this side are looking great today. And look at that embarrassing tree. I'm twice as tall as it. That tree, it would be so funny to hear. And I would feel kind of sad for that tree. If it was spent most of its time comparing and contrasting itself to others and trying to be better. It's just doing its thing. It's being a tree. And it's being the size tree that it was born to be. And it's doing its best to survive. Trees and things in nature.
They depend on one another. They serve one another. They feed one another. They protect one another through the root systems and the leaves on the tree protecting other trees. It's just, trees are a community. There's not really an individual tree.
Yeah. They're giving, they're sharing, they're defending themselves. They're being their full self. And so that's now my image that I try to be as a human, is like, just be a human as well as I can in the way that I can with the strengths and gifts that I have, and dial down those impulses towards being a bigger tree. But, and that's been a really practical, like, cause I'm connecting this all to like this impulse to separate and superior. I imagine a lot of people have it. I definitely have it. And I'm trying to dial that down because I don't believe it's true. I really don't believe it's true. I believe at my best, I'm playing the note that God has put on my life. And, like I didn't pick my parents. I didn't pick my genes. I didn't, there's so much like that I'm on for the ride. I didn't dictate my whole life. So how do I just be the best version of myself, right? How do I be the best tree that I can be? And that helps dial down some of the superiority and some of the fear, because then it's just live your life.
Yeah, if you lose the superiority, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
If you don't, if superiority is not important to you, if recognition is not important to you, apart from death, what do you fear? There's really not much to fear.
To me, that's freedom. On the other side of fear is a lot of freedom.
And I'm reluctant to say, because it sounds prideful, I'm afraid, but it's not. The truth is,
with only a little more humility, I would be perfect. Sorry.
Oh God, no! I've got plenty of that because God keeps providing it for me.
Sorry, Charlie, I disrupted you with it.
I am. No.
Disrupted you with a very bad joke. Yeah, keep going.
You know what has brought me to that point? What Richard calls the second half, and now with me, that he's talking about now and writing about, is the third half, the final half. When I find arriving at that place requires an almost total loss of the ego. So I'm not going to say my ego doesn't drive me. My ego drives me for sure. I have to deal with that all the time. But I don't have to be in control. I don't have to be the best. I don't live in comparison. That I don't compare myself. I don't compare myself to say, oh, I'll never be Ben Keesey, because it doesn't even occur to me. I don't want to be anybody else. I want to be friends, and I want to learn from you and share with you and do the work of life together. And there is something, if you're able to do old age well. If not all old people do old age well. They get stuck in their ways and they're just the same. But if you can experience what Richard talks about in the next half of life, the non-ego driven half of life, it is wonderful, man. It's really such a calm and delightful place.
What I hear is, that leads to then authentic acts of love, kindness, connection, relationship, freedom. And I think that's what most of us want, ultimately, to be around, to be part of. That's really neat, Charlie. You're referencing Richard's book, Falling Upward, which is one of his most well-known books.
Yeah.
That goes through the first half of life and second half of life.
Right.
And so much of the work of the second half of life is transitioning from building to giving, serving. It's not just about you. And then the third half of life is a different project as Richard is approaching his own transition or passing. The ultimate trust that even at the point of death, we can still trust that is not something to fear. That's the big one.
Last week I was with my spiritual director at the Abbey, and I'm fortunate that the abbot is my spiritual director, and he's just brilliant. My Catholic friends always laugh and tell me I'm more Catholic than they are, but I'm not. I just believe in Catholic. I believe in Catholic spirituality. The depths of spirituality in the Catholics are so rich, so much more than, there's lots of Protestants now, but as a tradition, the Catholics own that area. And so I was leading to something. Now I forgot what I was leading to. Oh, you know what I'd like to ask you? We came to talk about contemplation. How does contemplation serve you in becoming the kind of person that the heart of Ben Keesey wants you to be?
Wow. Any other easy questions you got over there?
Well, that is an easy question.
Let's see if I can grab any more tree metaphors. No. A, I don't know, but B,
that's a great answer, by the way. I don't know. It's a great start.
Well, I do know a few things, though. I say that tongue in cheek, but one of the many things that attracted me to Father Richard Rohr's work, and then the organization, the Center for Action and Contemplation, is the action and contemplation, and the integration of those and the interplay.
And action is first in the name too, not contemplation.
And action is first in the name, and it's not an easy integration. There's no easy answers of what does a life that is navigating the dance between action, which in my language, in my experience from my own life, is the building, changing, shaping, move towards more justice, more love, action, activism. Like my heart still breaks. There is still so much suffering on this planet, especially around violence against kids. Like it is what's happening right now in Congo, what's happening in Sudan, what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in parts of the United States, what's happening in Ukraine. The violence against children is alive and well. That's not the right way to say it, but you know what I mean. And so for me, action is like work on active problems and active issues of suffering. Contemplation is the is the complementary somehow reminding myself it's not about me. I'm not in charge of fixing or saving the world. It's letting go as it is, trusting that something, call it God, call it organizing intelligence,
Some
something
source
has this, yeah, and that I can relax and rest in that. And how those go together is, I mean, there's no easy answer. Richard has written multiple books on it, and it's still just it's grasping at it. And I think it's in my own life, it's a day-to-day assessing, and it's a day-to-day, but and it's a year by year, and it's a phase of life. And but your question of how does the contemplation part of that, I think for me, it's the counterbalance to my impulse to get in there, work 100% of the time, attached to the outcomes of my work, say this problem needs to change. Let's spin up the campaign. Let's go after it. There's a role for that energy, but the complementary, the trust, the sustaining energy that even if I work towards something, my ego isn't attached to the outcome as much. My energy is more. I'm more attuned to who I want to be in the means of doing the work. It pulls me out of just a drive to get things done. Here's a very simple way to say it after all that rambling. In the balance of being a human, it's a balance between being a human doing and a human being. And I have found the being, just reminding myself, I'm a tree. Like, I'm a tree. Be a good tree, Ben. Helps be just a really nice complementary balance to the doing, action, getting it done.
For me, I have a little bit different approach.
Yeah, please.
I mean, I endorse everything you said. I believe it. I think that's just bang on. However, those to me feel like results or consequences of something else that I do in contemplation that is so grounding. And that's what I got. I did this deep dive into the late medieval Christian mystics, and when I say deep dive, man, I mean deep dive, thousands of word journals and reading several books on the mystics from 1200 to almost 1500. And there is one common theme that just runs throughout, and that is the function of contemplative practices is union with the divine. Teresa nails that in the mansions, and that it is moving everything else aside, all my actions, all me, and it's only about the divine, however I define that. Now, I use scripture as a text that takes me there, and Richard is, I don't know that a lot of people, I don't hear them talk about what a biblicist Richard is. I mean, Richard is a profound biblicist. He knows the Bible as well as anybody that I hear. There's no Protestant that can say, I know the Bible more than Richard Rohr. You can't. And he uses that all the time, but he uses it in such a familiar way. It's part of who we are. It's not this word coming down upon us. It's a word integrating and working within us. And so when I do my contemplating, I do nothing else but, I know this sounds wowie wooey, but I seek to become one with God, to just ponder only on the nature, beauty, love, and divinity. And when those things become part of me, when the nature of God becomes part of me, I'm huge in Bonaventure, and Bonaventure says, before God is anything, God is good. And good is not good until it is given. If goodness is not given, it's not good. Well, that goes I frame it this way, that goodness is the noun and love is the verb. Love is the expression of God's goodness. Love is the expression of this kind of goodness. It's not, it's just, and when I live in those phases, that changes all of me, Ben. That part of Godness changes all of me.
You're taking it to a deeper level, that that conscious union with the divine, with God, or it leads me to think about like ultimate rest, because in that place I don't need to do anything or be anything. God's love is infinite to exactly who you are in this exact moment.
Beautifully put.
And that's different. That is, and it's available to everyone all the time.
Yeah.
No exceptions.
Yeah, and that's what my prayer life, when I go into my prayer room, that's what it's about. I'm a terrible petitionary prayer. And my spiritual director is working with me on this and saying, it would be helpful if I prayed expecting responses, expecting God to answer. Don't just say, oh, mysteriously is God going to do this? And, you get that human thing to say, oh man, God doesn't care that much about my everyday activities. And yet, when I start looking for answer to prayer, they almost never come as I expected. It's always something unsuspected, unexpected. That God is filled with surprise in bringing the ordinary to me. My son, for example, in baseball, I always pray, I pray regularly for my son, and he's in a very competitive sport, you're very evaluated and processed. You're in the public eye and people are looking at you. And, and so I'm praying that he will be successful there. And he is to a degree. He's, as a defensive catcher, he's very, very successful, extraordinarily successful. But his value lies elsewhere than his performance. His value lies into the love and friendship he brings to a team, the camaraderie of what he brings to a team. And now, he'll be 33 this August, and he wants to play baseball as long as he can, but he's going to end up being a manager. That's where they see him. And that's God's answer to my prayer. That was never part of my prayer. I wanted Austin to be an all-star, and God said he is, but it's not on the all-star team. And that's answer to prayer. That if I'm not careful, I can completely miss it. I can completely miss it because it didn't come in the way I hoped.
Things rarely do, right? If you look at your life or my life, things rarely come in the way that you hope, and yet gratitude is everywhere for how it is. Talking about Austin and playing baseball, I heard someone say recently, I was like, that's such a good way to say it, that there's so many parts of our culture that truly are win-lose, and sports is that.
Right.
Like, this team wins, this team loses. So for me to win, you have to lose.
Right.
And to some degree that exists in business. When companies are in competition.
It's true, yeah.
We're going up, you're going down. To some degree that exists in education, especially more and more. Like, I get the good grades, I get into the good school, you don't. Win, lose. For me to win, you have to lose. And they made the case that a great counterbalance to that is that our religions and our spirituality need to be win-win, because and they can be. That for me to quote win, you don't have to lose. In fact, for me to win is for you to win too, for us to win together. And I really like that. And the way that then, how I see that is like how many of the positive virtues seem to multiply. When you show up with vulnerability, it's easier for me to be vulnerable. When you show up with kindness, it's easier for me to be kind. When you show up in a loving way and in a generous way, generosity begets generosity. Like there's a positive win-win snowball that that I hope to turn, keep turning in my own life. And it's just noticing how much of our culture it's kind of set up in the other direction.
It's the American dream. The American dream is filled with accomplishment and being something, and being the best. I want to be the best.
And what I'm offering, what I liked about this is like, okay, if there's a role for that, the role is like sports. It's amazing. Competition in sports, it's awesome. I love it. But let's hold the domain of individual dignity, self-worth, inherent worth in the domain of religion, which is we are connected, we are one. This is not win-lose. This is not me versus you. This is us together. And that's an important part of a society, of a culture, of a community, is a spirituality and ethic of inherent connectedness and oneness, win-win, not win-lose.
It's common vernacular for us to talk win-lose, win-win. I like that. I agree. But I'm at a point in life where I don't even want to win-win. I just want us both to thrive. And if we're both thriving...
You don't want me to win, Charlie? Come on.
I want you to do more than win.
I see.
I want you to thrive. I want you to be fully alive. I want you to be fully engaged in serving the community of God and serving people, thriving at that. And that it's not competitive. There is no winning or losing in that. There is only doing it. Your word that I like, it's only being that. It's being those characteristics. Ben, we've been a while.
We solved it.
This is chatting with you. So listeners know this what we just had here. This is our normal conversation.
It's pretty neat. Yeah, it's pretty neat.
You are a treasure in my life, my friend.
You as well, Charlie. It's been a joy to get to know you in the context of the CAC community, and now as a friend. And it's fun to see you navigating this chapter, and I think with courage and honesty and vulnerability and authenticity. You're navigating this in public and in private, and I honor the journey, my friend.
How kind of you to say. That means a lot to me. And and also I just want to thank you for coming on the show and spending an hour with me and being vulnerable and divulging your life and how stories of your life is going to serve a lot of people. It's going to serve a lot of people. Thank you for that.
Do you mind if I say one thing?
No, I don't mind.
As you say that, I will very likely have what I like to call a vulnerability hangover after we hang up.
Will you?
Which is me being like,
will you?
Why did I make that stupid joke? Why did I say that about myself? Do I really mean that? So to help me with that, I would ask anyone hearing this to just listen to these words gently. I'm working this out. I'm a work in progress. So a lot of this I haven't said before or tried to say before, making sense of my life. And so if I invite you to listen to it gently, then it helps me have the courage to keep going and not feel the fear, the control of my own story, control of my identity, because I'm working this out. So thank you.
And it's obvious that you're working this out, that you're in process, but you're moving in a direction of wholeness. You're moving in a direction of thriving. God bless you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, man. And I want to thank everybody for listening and tuning in to the next chapter with Charlie. And until next, this is Charlie Hedges signing off. Bye for now.